Hello, everyone. It's Frances Widdowson here. Welcome to the Rational Space Disputations. And with me today is Kathy Drake. And Kathy is a student at MRU and is becoming increasingly famous due to her no-holds-barred defense of freedom of speech on campus. So welcome to the Rational Space Disputations, Kathy.
Thank you, Frances.
Anyway, I met Kathy at the University of Lethbridge. I think that's the first time I met Kathy. And I had kind of interacted with Kathy a little bit on various social media interactions. But Kathy was there when there was a huge meltdown from a whole bunch of activists at the University of Lethbridge, resulting in me not being able to give my talk in a speaker's corner type of format. And I was very, when Kathy introduced herself, I was saying, "Oh, you're Kathy Drake," because I'd talked to you online, but I wasn't sure. Oops, my phone just went off. My apologies, everyone. I unplugged my regular phone, but I forgot about my cell phone. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask Kathy some questions for about an hour. And then what happens is that Kathy is going to ask me questions, just because we want to make sure that I'm not controlling these proceedings according to whatever parameters I'm using. And also it allows for Kathy to address things which she doesn't think that we've gone into in very much detail or we need to talk about more. So I guess before we begin, it would be a good idea for you, and there's Kathy's shirt. I should let people know about Kathy's shirt, which has been a bit controversial. As far as I know, there's been no official repercussions, but
No.
it was on social media and people were pretty positive about it, that you were taking a stand and were opposing it. But perhaps give us a bit of background about your circumstances and what you've done in terms of your life, things that you think that the audience would find helpful in understanding our current situation.
I'm a student. I go to school part-time, and I basically went back to school after Frances got fired because I felt like there needed to be an alternative point of view on campus. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I got a degree in a Bachelor of Applied Ecotourism and Outdoor Leadership. So that was the college version. So I'm doing the university version now that the college has transformed into a university. And so I'm doing a Bachelor of Health and Physical Education with a major in ecotourism and outdoor leadership. So I have the full 8 years to complete the degree, but I have only about 11 courses. So I take about 1 to 2 courses a semester. And it's not just to be an alternative point of view on campus. I also want to document the indoctrination because it seems as though the university has turned into an indoctrination center far more than I ever remember, like really, really badly.
Okay, so and you were a student for a while, some time ago, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So if you could just give the years that you were a student, and this was at Mount Royal, or have you been a student at other universities?
Just at Mount Royal. So I started in 2005,
Okay.
just doing general study upgrades. And then I got into the ETOL program. Then on a field school, I was assaulted by another student in the middle of the night. She drew on my face and on my leg. And I dropped out of school. Then I got back into school with special permission from Chad London, who was the dean of the faculty at the time. And the office was called Human Rights or something like that, Mount Royal Human Rights. And so they got me back into the program with special permission, and I became the last person to graduate from the old college degree in 2019, I believe.
Okay. Yes. And then you decided to come back. When did you come back for the new degree?
I think it's been since 2021.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, so you mentioned that you find that there's a lot of indoctrination that's
Mhm.
happening. So what kinds of indoctrination do you think you're experiencing or you're seeing when you're at Mount Royal University?
Well, around the campus right now, there's TV screens, and these TV screens have messages on them about indigenization. They're telling you it's your responsibility as a settler to learn about reconciliation or whatever other messages they have that they say that indigenous people were mining, that Christopher Columbus met indigenous people from North America in Ireland,
Mhm.
which is very interesting. I don't, I'd like to see the support for that. That's the things that they just kind of make these statements. There's no support. And I'm under the impression that a university, to be a true academic institution, should not be putting their rubber stamp or on any specific views. They should not be espousing any specific views. And so they're putting the rubber stamp on indigenization, decolonization,
Mm.
diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of these gender things. And there's no ability to push back. It doesn't seem like they're allowing any counter voices.
Mm.
They will say things as I'm sure we'll get into, but the talk yesterday on denialism, where he said, if someone says 2 + 2 = 5, I'm not even going to talk to him. And it's like, well, history is not a mathematical equation.
Mm.
History is open to interpretation, and you need to have many different points of view in order to come up to your own conclusions.
Mm. Yes.
So, and so then also in the classroom itself,
Mm.
um, the curriculum has been, not asking questions like, do you think that colonization is good or bad? Or it's just one direction. How are you going to, fulfill your role in the calls to action? Uh, and then Elder Roy Bearchief, as he introduced himself, came to my class where I wore this shirt. Um, and he spoke and he played a video. And the video was about the Blackfoot spiritual story of the, what did he call it? He called it the Annie Tapisi spider web. And so he's acting like a spiritual leader. It felt like a cult. It really
Mm.
felt like a cult. So in the video, there was all this dramatic music. Yeah, it was supposed to be like moving, and then they had a drone that went above and you could hear drumming and it was like almost like spa music
Yeah.
combined. And then they show people in this human spider web wearing orange shirts, like doing sort of a round dance. And then he was drawing pictures in the video, and he was drawing the lines on the globe, like the latitude and longitude. And that was his proof that the spider creation story is true
Mm.
because we have latitude and longitude lines. So that was created by a spider. I'm not sure exactly what. It doesn't. It didn't feel like anyone was able to question. It didn't seem like any sort of critical thinking was happening. It
Mm.
just felt like a cult.
Yes. So this I just want to get because the spider. This is kind of I find this intriguing. This spider web kind of idea. So just based upon because I did see this a number of years ago, which was actually I believe it was the that faculty that you're in had this as part of their um, promotional materials for something on Twitter, and I was to some extent satirizing this situation, which was not appreciated. Um, but it is what can you just repeat what is so it's a creation story
Hmm.
about and what is the creation story? Do you know?
You know, it was very difficult to understand what he was saying. He was kind of incoherently rambling, but we
Mm.
all had to treat him with reverence. You
Yeah.
couldn't say, "I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying." So I'm not quite sure exactly what the creation story is in itself, but he was saying that it's about vibrations. He kept saying,
Yes.
stay close together,
Energy as well.
energy, yeah, help each
Yes.
other. And if you feel the vibrations on the web, you go to the vibrations, the way that a spider.
No, I remember that. And it's like, because that does happen on the spider web, where the spider will feel an insect, and then they'll go over and wrap the insect in a whole bunch of
Eat it.
silk and then eat the insect.
Yeah.
It seems to me to be somewhat of a fraught kind of metaphor, I guess, or simile. And energy, because I remember in this posting, the academic Leroy Littlebear from the University of Lethbridge was mentioned too, because that's a big thing of Leroy Littlebear's, is to claim that the teachings of the Blackfoot understood quantum mechanics and the theory of relativity before Einstein discovered it, type of idea too. And there was a bit of reference to that in this spider web type of discussion. But it seems to be, one of the things I remember was something about relationships, that I guess the silk on the web has relationships between different parts, and that's kind of the nature of how people are either do interact with one another or should interact with one another. I believe that's the case as well. But it's not very clear how the creation story is related to the spider web kind of idea.
No, none of it's very clear. I mean, even the Science Center was doing a thing on Indigenous ways of knowing and talking about how they already knew about quantum science and that sort of thing. So this is going into the mainstream.
Yep.
Because there's a whole bunch of students that get indoctrinated and then they go out and they work for.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's very, I've known about this for a number of years, and so it's kind of the fact, and as well. So in terms of being able to question it, and how do you see that happening, or what kind of sort of vibe, I guess, do you get about?
The vibe is that you can't question him on anything. He's some sort of like reverent spiritual leader. So for example, he said, and he seemed to be quite proud of this, that it took 6 whole years from him, from finding that he had this idea of wanting to create a human spider web to actually accomplishing creating the event where people would show up to create a human spider web. So 6 years for something that is like, shouldn't take 6 years. How much billing did he bill our tuition dollars to come up with this? People walking around in a circle outside. That takes.
And that's what it is. It's people walking around in a circle.
Yeah, people. Some people stand in lines to make the spokes of the spider web, and then people walk in circles to make the other parts of the spider web with speakers and drummers in the middle. I don't see how that would take 6 years to create an event like that. So even just questioning that, like just being like, do you think like why would that take so long? You can't question anything. You can't say why am I being taught a spiritual teaching, a religious teaching in an immersive way in a secular institution. I'm not being taught it in this is what some people believe, but this is why it's, magical thinking, or this is why it, being able to critique it or look at it from different angles. It's from an immersive way, as if I was in a Christian school. I wouldn't be able to necessarily question the Christian doctrine. It'd be like, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
That's the way it's being taught.
Yes. But people don't are you told don't question this?
No, everyone just.
I'm kind of interested in how people kind of absorb that type of understanding without it being directly told to them. Do you have any sense of how that happens?
That's something that's interesting to explore for sure, because it seems like there's a fear.
Yeah.
You can like cut with a knife, that if you question him, you must be racist. If you don't think that these teachings are like, if you're not moved by them, or you don't, then you must be racist. And that's this term that you hear all the time, like this weaponized buzzword
Yeah.
comes up where it's just like, don't even ask if the potlatches had human sacrifices. That's
Yeah.
a racist question.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you ever tried to question these things? With the exception of this event, which I'm going to get to shortly, but because I thought that was your questions were pretty were very, very interesting to hear how that was going to be interacted with. But have you tried in other contexts to ask questions, and have you sensed any kind of hostility, or like has that happened?
So in this class, I didn't like I had this shirt and I had the book Grave Error on my desk. And that was the extent of it. I wasn't going to ruffle any more feathers or put my neck out any more than that.
Yeah.
And then in other classes, well, this is a lecture section, and then there's a tutorial section for this course.
Yeah.
So in the tutorial section, the professor seemed very open to me being able to critique things like indigenization or colonization, just saying, I think colonization is a good thing. I like flushing toilets. I didn't say that specifically, but just like being able, I just asked, like, am I allowed to disagree? Do I have freedom of scholarship? And I asked that as well in another course with the professor, and she said yes. And she said, I'm not going to fail you if you disagree with
Okay.
any of these matters. So,
Yeah.
and I
And
showed,
that's something I think that's very important for students to hear, that sort of thing, because even though it might not necessarily happen 100%, at least it's kind of, you're reassured that that's a principle that is at least entertained, as opposed to, I don't quite know what happens in other contexts as to this kind of question, how that would be answered. Um, so so explain to audience members the whole thing that happened with respect to, because they're probably curious about that. And for people who are on social media, how I found out about this was that I saw a picture of Kathy with this shirt that she said that she had worn to her class at Mount Royal. And I was quite impressed, because I don't think I don't even think I would do that now. It would be, I would see that as I would just be inviting a reaction that I'm really not prepared to handle, as to what possibly could happen, because you really didn't have any knowledge of what was going to be the reaction to what you had done. So what made you, so when did you decide to do this? What were the circumstances that led you to go about doing this?
well, I've been following Jim McMurtry, who's a school teacher who was fired because he said that residential school children died of diseases, not from murder. And he posted this shirt on his page, and I said, I'm gonna buy one of those shirts and I'm gonna wear it to school. And I didn't know when I was gonna wear it to school. I just knew that I wanted to wear it to school. And then when I was sitting down in my favorite place to study near the climbing wall, a professor came by who wanted to chat with me because she enjoyed having me in one of her other courses. And I opened up dialogue about, the residential schools and the book Grave Error. And I said, they found septic tiles at Kamloops. There's no bodies in the ground. And I told her about this shirt, and I said, I don't know if I'm going to have for lack of a better word, cojones to wear it to campus. And explained that I planned to do this. I didn't know when, and so then just that morning, I was like, okay, this elder Roy Bear Chief is going there. I know that he has a lot of power in the school. It seems like he's kind of like a figurehead for this. And it was like, I don't know if you ever listened to Alan Watts, where he talks about like, if you have an arrow in the quiver, sometimes you have to not even know yourself when you're going to let it go.
Mm.
It was kind of like that. So I just put the shirt on and went to school, and I put a hoodie over top that said, I love freedom of speech. And then when I got into the class, I sat down and I took my hoodie off, and the look on, Stephen Price's face, and the look on Roy Bear Chief's face when they saw the shirt was kind of just, yeah, it was a little bit like this, but they didn't address me or anything like that. And I also, Jordan Peterson inspired me. He was running a space, or he was participating in a space on X, and he just said how we conduct ourselves over the next 2 months, he's like, are going to be very important. He really emphasized courage. So even though I'm scared, even though I have anxiety, I don't want to be ostracized. I don't want to be treated poorly, these sorts of things. But courage anyways, in spite of the fear.
Yeah. Yeah. So you went into this class, you had the two authority figures looking a bit startled, I guess, that this was happening.
Mm-hmm.
What reaction did you get from students? Has anything happened? So then what day did you do this on? I can't remember.
It was Monday.
It was on Monday. And what has happened since then?
One student walked with me out of the classroom while I was wearing the shirt, and she's a wonderful gal. I've known her from another course, and I just said, I'm here to destroy the woke mind virus. Just joking. She's like, I love that about you. So I
Yeah.
did get a positive feedback that way. And everyone else has just kind of been treating me like I have the plague or leprosy.
Yeah, no, well, and this
Yeah.
is a big problem for students, especially. It's a problem for everyone. I shouldn't minimize it because Stephen Parrott, who's a psychology professor from Mount St. Vincent in uh, Halifax, I was talking to him, I guess it was almost a few months ago in May, and he's a psychology professor, so he has some knowledge of these things, and he said and he's a pretty outspoken guy as things go, and he says that for himself the social ostracism is for him, he can't really do a lot. He's very limited in what he can do, and he does quite a lot actually. And I think that is, and I know I have that. I haven't had that, and it was worse. I've been gradually starting to realize that if people don't want to have anything to do with me, then that's their right, and that's and I'm not if I'm not gonna. It's not gonna bother me, or at least I talk to myself. I have self talks about this because I'm not doing anything wrong, and the fact that they can't realize that is their own situation, that sort of thing. Um, but how and unfortunately, I should say, I'm lucky because as you said, people treating you like you're the plague. I hope that's not going to last, and to some extent, it depends on how other people respond. Um, but I haven't had that happen to me. Like I've had it happen within the people who I don't really have a lot of respect for, so it doesn't bother me. But amongst the people I really respect, no one has shunned me. So that's a really important thing, and I don't know how people deal with it if that happens to them. So, in terms of your own situation, how are you able to deal with that?
I just I try and just be pleasant anyways, and just there's one guy, it's not because of this, it was because I refuse to use they them pronouns for one of the fellow employees. He gives me dirty, dirty looks every time he sees me, and I just go, hi, and I just walk the other direction. That's it, and if they're fear, or if I invoke anxiety because I symbolize some sort of polarized position, then I try and just breathe through the anxiety of being in a classroom if they're uncomfortable around me or anything like that. And some people, on the other hand, because I am polarizing, some young lads, we had to go and introduce ourselves in groups in one of the courses, and I used the same line, I'm here to destroy the woke mind virus, as a joke, and they blushed, they went bright red, these young lads, and they just said, that's so awesome, but they're So you get different things, but as far as dealing with it goes psychologically, I'm a lot older than these people. They don't feel like my peers anyways. They feel like closer to the age of my son.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm not too worried about it, and I want to try and exhibit leadership in showing people how to not allow other people's opinions of them to dictate how they, behave. Because for me, this is really important. My country has been slandered, right? Like we in our national anthem, we stand on guard for thee. This is me standing on guard for thee, for my country. My great grandfather fought in World War I. He survived mustard gas. No one can kill me for this, I hope, right? Like we're in a war, and so without the dire consequences of death. And my great grandfather faced that courageously, so I should face being ostracized courageously as a consequence.
Okay. And I just want to get a bit of a sense too, historically, in terms of your experiences at the university. You were there, as you mentioned, from 2005 to a number of years, and then you came back later on. What did you notice about the university in terms of how it was when you first started versus the period, the second period?
I noticed that in the first period, professors and faculty members were able to be loose. They were able to be authentic.
Yeah.
They could put their foot in the mouth in their mouth every now and then. They could say things that were maybe even slightly inappropriate. I
Yeah.
had one professor who commented on the nice legs of these climbing gals that were mountaineer women. They weren't students, but he was just talking to some of the lads or whatever on a mountaineering trip. Saying those mountaineering women sure do have nice legs, which is true because they're climbing mountains. Things like that you'd be written up for, and all sorts of things. And now, like I have one professor who, at the end of every class, she goes, "Please don't complain. Please don't complain. Don't file any complaints, because if she lets us out early, people complain about that." Because it's like, "Oh, you're taking away from my education. I wanted to be lectured for." Well, if you go through all the material, and then you should be able to let the class out early. And if you as a student, if you feel like you're being shortchanged,
Yeah.
stay behind and ask questions. You'll have a one-on-one session with the prof. You make the most out of it, as opposed to complaining. It seems like the whole culture right now is complaining about any little thing, and the teachers, everybody, the teachers and the students all just walk on eggshells, to the point that students are even afraid to participate in class. Even in classes where participation is what your marks are about, people will still be afraid to
Yeah, I know.
say anything.
You don't want to say the wrong thing. And I've heard students are afraid of their grades. Like, there's complaints, there's grades, feeling that you might get a bad grade if you say something that is opposed to what the professor is arguing. I don't know if that's you've heard anything like that in your discussions with people.
Yeah, well, and I felt that, like, when I did women's studies courses in the first go, I felt that perhaps if I didn't agree with certain things, that I might not get a good grade, but that could have just been my perception. I don't know if that's
No, and
true.
it's hard to test. It's an interesting question as to how you would test that, because it'd be hard to get a kind of a counterfactual, and sometimes, right, it's an easy way to blame professors, because you say, instead of kind of looking at, and I'm not saying this about you, I'm just saying, it's a general possibility that instead of taking responsibility for your own, for a student's own work that's substandard, you accuse the professor of giving bad marks because of for reasons that are not valid. It's a way of kind of deflecting your own thing. So that's a difficult question. I have heard that said. I wanted to ask as well, about, oh yeah, so the complaints. I don't want to miss this because I wanted to talk about the lecture yesterday, but I want to talk about your other experience that you had, which I think is very, very important for people to hear about a complaint that was filed against you.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could just provide some background. What happened there?
I got an email from student community standards, calling me into a meeting. And then in the meeting, they wanted me to sign paperwork saying that I would have zero contact with one of the faculty members, and that which I didn't sign. And that I would not take any of his courses. Then they sent me another email after that meeting, saying that there was interim requirements that I was not allowed to take any of his courses, otherwise I would be breaking community standards. So even though I didn't sign that, they imposed that. And they made claims that I had, in private conversations, revealed juicy details that were completely mixed up, that were not. I did spill some tea. There's a faculty member that we were students together and we dated.
Hmm.
And I had a couple drinks with some of my fellow students and they were like, yeah, spill the tea, spill the tea. And so but in the complaint, it said that I had continually and unwanted conversations about being in a relationship with this faculty member. And then they claimed that I, said very lewd things that I didn't say. They claimed that I had a fight with him when I've never had a fight. We've never had a fight ever. So just saying, so basically I spilled the tea with some dudes who I talked to yesterday. I said, like, don't worry about it. Like, I don't care if you told other people what I said too. Like, I still like you. And we're probably going to do a backpacking trip together at some point in time. Like, we're all good.
Yeah.
So just through the grapevine of kids talking, someone who had malicious intent against me, who didn't like me because she could tell I wasn't woke in class, and you could tell that she had like something really against me, decided to file sort of like these frivolous, trumped up charges, these complaints. And it was just a really bizarre experience, and essentially sent a letter back to Student Community Standards saying, like, as a Canadian citizen, you can't police my private conversations. You can't tell me what I am allowed to say and what I am not allowed to say. Plus, here are all of the inaccuracies in what was
Yeah.
claimed to have been said about me.
Yes. And so none of this happened in class or anything to do with MRU. You were just with some fellow students talking about circumstances.
Well, one part that was complained about that did happen in class,
Yeah.
or like part of class, was that there was a group chat because we had to do a event. So we had to create a curriculum day for outdoor adventure for a bunch of kids, and we had to do it as a group. And so we had this group chat. And in the group chat, I wanted to teach kids campfire songs because I think that these are super important for kids learning how to use their voice and gain that confidence. It's a really fun way for kids to be able to develop that. And the person who who I believe filed the complaint, and who other students have told me they believe that she filed the complaint as well, she filed it anonymously. She responded saying that kids aren't going to think that's cool, which is super toxic thinking, right? Like kids shouldn't be worried about being cool so that they don't sing campfire songs, right? So I just responded with, sorry, I actually learned about the importance of campfire songs from our instructor who I worked with, and he was the king of campfire songs. And then I posted some pictures of us together that are publicly available on Facebook. None of them were suggestive. One of them, I was wearing a fake beard dressed as a pirate. And when we were in a canoe wearing life jackets and whatever, I just said, I worked with him. Here's the evidence that I worked with him. I'm not just going to make a claim that I worked with him and that he was the campfire king without showing evidence. So she complained about that I showed pictures of us together. And my lawyer in the letter just kind of said, that's ridiculous. These are publicly available photos. Anyone can search up his name and see these photos on Facebook today.
Yeah. And it was never mentioned in that discussion that you'd had this previous relationship or anything like that. That was
No, I
never
just said we worked
conversation in
together.
class.
Right. Yeah. And then me mentioning that we had dated was in a conversation in a pub with students a year prior to this complaint.
Yes.
Almost a year prior.
And okay, so that's an interesting. Any other? So there was this that thing that happened in class. There was your conversation that you had in the pub with two other students that presumably got told to other people. That's why it was known, but we don't know how. We don't know why this student was taking offense at you posting these pictures.
It seemed like she wanted to find anything to try and just maliciously harm me in some way,
Yes.
academically.
Yes. And you didn't know who the person was who had filed the complaint. Were you able to see the complaint itself?
No,
No.
I was just able to hear verbally what the student, what's her name? Nikki Renault, what she orally iterated what she believed the complaint was, which was just very over the top and completely inaccurate as to what I actually said in the pub as well. So
okay. But there was no other. That was it. That was it. It was those two things, or there were other things too.
Those were the two things. Yeah, that was it.
Okay. Yeah. And what was supposed to happen when you were told about so you're told this is the claims that have happened and so on. What then happens with respect to these things?
They wanted me to sign the paper saying I would never contact him on campus.
Okay.
In any fashion.
Okay. And you refused to sign that?
I refused to sign that, and we've already I was sitting on the couch and he came over and told me he was sick, and that I said, I hope you feel better. He was going home for a sick day, and he made a point of saying hi. Like, there's no weirdness. This was like 15 years ago that we dated, and all of the faculty members were fully aware of it because they saw us as kids, the professors who were still there. So it's not a secret. It's never been a secret. We're all adults, right?
Yeah, I find these whole complaints thing is just an unbelievably toxic kind of thing, and it's hard to know. And I've thought about this quite a lot as to what should be the standards that we're dealing with here. Like, is there like, what do you think should be matters for the university to become involved in? Like, certainly anything off campus, I have a hard time, unless you can directly link it to something that's going to, like, I guess if you are and this is just an extreme example, if you're a rapist or something like that, and you've been convicted of rape and so on, and now you're going to be a student at MRU, I don't quite know how that's dealt with in university things, but I could see people, raising kind of concerns about, they're now going to have to interact with someone, and I believe there's been some circumstances like that. So, but that's like, people have perhaps a legitimate fear for their safety, especially if you're going on field trips and so on. So, like I can sort of see that a little bit. But what's your thoughts on this? Like, what kinds of things are limitations there?
I mean, there's my example of the field school where it was the last day of the field school. We all had one celebratory drink, just one drink.
Yeah.
And I had a 6 a.m. bus to catch to Guatemala because I was going to go travel Guatemala by myself.
Mm.
And I was staying in a room with two other students. We all had our own beds. And
Yeah.
one of the students was a boyfriend of another student who was not staying in that room. And she and her friend came into the room and they drew on my face and they lifted up my pants and they drew on my inner thigh, my upper inner thigh. I should have complained right away because this
Mm.
was on a field school. It should be considered like a
Mm.
classroom in a sense. It's off campus, but you're within an academic setting
Mm.
off campus. And I just played possum because I just didn't want any conflict. I didn't know how to deal with the situation. I just wanted to catch my 6 a.m. bus in 2 hours, right? I just needed sleep. But later on, she took pictures and she posted it all over the internet.
Yeah.
So that was like the online slander using those pictures and all this sort of stuff. That was the evidence I had to show the school, which got me back into school, that sort of thing. But yeah, so like actually like unwanted touch,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And
non-consensual
this is, I
touch.
guess, is illegal. Like
Yeah,
this
that's
is like
illegal. Yeah, like
entering
actual
into assault territory. But
Mhm.
jokes, like this is a big thing I've kind of pondered because of my, not that I stay away from that. Well, no, I have shown myself videos of John Oliver videos that have, sexually explicit jokes that are told, but um they're
They're
not
not
jokes
directed at a
about
student.
they're not jokes about other people. Like
Right.
they're not directing the joke at a student, that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on a professor, for example, directing kind of sexualized jokes at students?
Right. Can you give an example?
Um, Something like a professor making comments about students not being sexually attractive, that kind of thing,
Um,
joking about it. So you
joking.
don't really know that they're serious or not serious. It's like, for example, professors are not supposed to have sex with their students, but why would any professor want to have sex with these not very attractive female students?
I don't, I'm not offended by that. Like, I think that's funny. I don't see how that could be grounds for, because he or she, whoever's making that comment, is not proposing that there should be sex
Yeah,
between this. Like, it's just an off-color joke, and we're supposed to be adults. In an
yeah,
adult world, you make off-color jokes. And in the hallways, I saw these two kids overhearing them and they were saying, oh, they treat us like we're still in high school. This is so easy in university, and there's a lot of infantilizing aspects of university, and perhaps saying that you can't be exposed to an off-color joke
yeah,
could be infantilizing. So for me, like if a university professor said, you're not supposed to sleep with your students, but Kathy, you're too ugly to sleep with anyways, I would laugh. Like I wouldn't complain about that. That wouldn't be something that I'd see as grounds for complaint. I think people need to, and that's why I said there's like a culture of complaining.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like people need to like up their personal threshold, I think.
yeah,
to
yeah.
compl-
And I'm not going to mention who I'm talking about here, but he's very It's a he's very popular with it. Like the students, for all his, he is popular and no one minded, and it was everyone knew this is what the situation was going to be when they took. It wasn't a big shock but the whole thing was a setup because someone took his course specifically to document every single joke that he made and then compile this into a litany of misdeeds that happened. But I was gonna because I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this. Like I don't I think because I'm a free speech absolutist and I think there's just way too much restrictions on things which are not even like I would be very hesitant to do any of the things that I just took for granted of doing for my entire university career at this stage. Like, and this isn't even jokes or anything. It's just the contentious arguments. Like, I used to show a TVO, which is Television Ontario. It's available to millions of people in Ontario, so it's not like it's like some fringe thing. Anyway, they had a great discussion on after this Charlie Hebdo assassinations on freedom of speech and whether mocking Islam should be allowed in society. And as part of that discussion, they featured one of the cartoons, the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, in this TVO documentary. Not because they were trying to be provocative, but they had to show the evidence of what we're talking about here.
Right.
And I showed this for many years. And as I went on, it got more and more difficult to do it. And one time, there was a Muslim student who got extremely angry to the point where I felt slightly threatened. I felt threatened about this situation, and I was like, oh, but I kind of was just kept on doing it because I thought this is important here, and if we aren't able to do this in the classroom, we're gonna just have everything is gonna be off limits because this is just one issue. And there's a whole bunch of other things and I wasn't taking a position or anything. I was just saying this is a big issue that we should be aware of in terms of freedom of expression. And it is very, very pertinent anyway. But in terms of contentious ideas, what's your view about ideas being discussed in the classroom?
I think it's incredibly important. And I think that the more contentious, the more important it is to discuss them and to hear every point of view. But yeah, like you said, it's almost like we're not allowed to discuss ideas anymore. It's so tense. You can't just, it's painful. Like the fact that it takes such a degree of courage to say something that you think someone could get very, very emotionally upset about and decide that they need to file some sort of complaint against you. Like in the class where this student filed a complaint against me, one of the students had given an example of what they thought a good person should do. And the example was that this person was using all of their money, giving it all away to homeless shelters, and then go and volunteering with homeless people alone out on the street. And I just said, I'm sorry, but this is a stupid idea. This is pathological altruism. You have to make sure that you don't turn into a homeless person yourself. So you need to build up some savings, put it in investments. And then you need to not go out on the street alone with zero training. Go get a social work degree and go and make sure that you have protection and training or whatever, right? Like go get some training under your belt. Don't just go and hang out with homeless people alone. Like I was like, this is not a good example of something to do. And you could tell that she was very, very offended by me pointing out that I thought this was a dumb idea. You're not even allowed to say, I think this is a dumb idea. As adults, we should be able to hear and be open to the fact that probably the majority of our ideas are dumb.
Yeah. And that's how are we gonna get rid of our dumb ideas if we're not able to articulate them?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I'm going to bring up one of the most toxic ideas that some people think shouldn't be discussed.
Oh, goodness.
Pedophilia.
Right.
So, and I can't believe this happened at the University of Lethbridge. But I don't know when this was. This must have been, 2017 or so. Anyway, they had a talk that a student gave, graduate student, I believe, philosophy graduate student, in defense of pedophilia. That was the talk.
It's a lot.
Should that be allowed?
Right.
Yeah.
I was trying to have this discussion in a X space last night, and I was called retarded and insane.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to bring up the Tom Flanagan incident.
Yeah.
When I was trying to.
So we're going to be talking about this, but I would ask you,
Yeah.
this is a bit tricky.
Yeah.
Not to say who the professor is who we're talking about. because we don't want to have the professor named in this discussion. Well, no, not Flanagan's fine. Talking
Right,
about,
right.
but
So,
the
so
person who's talking about Tom Flanagan.
as far as someone like defending pedophilia and
So what is the situation? So what happened here with respect to this Tom Flanagan pedophilia in terms of this discussion that was going on?
Well, I was trying to ask people because I was trying to get an understanding about what he said and you know what should be allowed and what should not be allowed. And
Yes.
I was trying to I'm in a discussion with other people who claim to be freedom of speech absolutists, right? And
Mhm.
I'm saying I'm saying that my knee-jerk reaction to someone you know discussing pedophilia in any sort of positive light is visceral. It's like
Yeah,
and I'm trying
me
to
too. I think it's a justification of child abuse is general. It's my own personal opinion. Now, I'm humble about this. It would be kind of good to do a street epistemology session on this, because then you could get people to say, okay, what would it take for you to move one way or another on this issue? Because
right.
that's interesting.
And so I was trying to explain to them that my understanding, which I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, is that Tom Flanagan was saying that no one should go to prison for either viewing images or for drawing images. And I was trying to ask them, do you think that drawing pornographic images should be protected under freedom of speech? And someone brought up a great argument that that could be considered a threat to do that, right? And so threats aren't protected.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good argument, but people started turning around on me. They started calling me a pedophile.
Yeah.
You know, they right away, they were just like, no, right to the wood chipper. You know, you got to put them all in the wood chipper right away. And I, I don't want to be the type of person that would get into the mind frame that could burn someone alive. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
for
Exactly.
no matter how horrible they are or what or
Yeah.
whatever, like I'm not I'm not a violent person.
Yeah.
But I believe in the utmost protection of children.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, the argument of, you know, should someone viewing images of child pornography, should they go to prison? Is that what's best for society? You know, I would argue yes, because they're creating a market to create these images as a
Yeah.
consumer.
Yeah.
But the fact that someone can't even have the argument without being lambasted as having
Yeah.
all of their opinions null and void.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
not allowed to have it. Now they're not allowed to even be talked about. Tom Flanagan was a very highly respected public figure.
Yeah. Well, he's sort of, people have kind of forgotten about this episode, you know, so he's kind of been able to go along there, but it's brought up whenever people want to discredit his other opinions, which don't have anything to do with this. He was making an off the cuff remark, and I must admit I should get the exact transcript of it, but I have heard him discussing this after the fact, and he didn't make clear, which is a danger when you're speaking off the cuff, that he was talking about, according to him, that he didn't make a distinction between drawings and pictures, photographs. And for me, that's a huge distinction, because and that was a Supreme Court case. So for people who don't know this, there's a Supreme Court decision, which is about a guy by the name of Sharp, who was drawing pornographic images of children. But it was just in his, and I don't think he was sharing them with people. I could be wrong. I'd have to look at this decision, but I think it was just like the fact that it's in your imagination and you're putting it on paper. Like, this is like, you know, and the Supreme Court said, no, you're allowed to draw pornographic images. If you're going to take photographs, that's a totally different matter entirely, because now you've got a victim. In order for you to have those photos, there's going to be a victim that's going to have been exploited, and that's kind of being complicit in the crime, and you're now creating a market for this activity. You know, be similar to having a murder, like viewing, you know, murder scenes and versus drawing, murders, snuff films, these kinds of horrible things that we don't like to think about. But yeah, so, but anyway, I find it, but the discussion, this event in defense of pedophilia, what about that? What's your views on that?
I haven't really thought about it before, because the first time I like kind of thought about it was, I think it was a Society for Academic Freedom Zoom event. And one of the hosts was talking about how even in the cases of pedophilia, right? And I was like, whoa, like I hadn't thought about that. That's kind of outside of the pale.
Yeah. It
Um,
probably is one of the most that and the Holocaust. Those are the
right.
two. Those are the two. It seems to me there's varying degrees of third rail kind of things, and those two, I think, are the worst. And pedophilia, I think, would be the worst of all of them. But in terms of it's very, and this is kind of what I've argued before, is in order to understand the issue in an academic setting, you have to be able to have latitude to explore ideas which others, and it's not like you're even like you're not, like, you can have a discussion about pedophilia that we're having right now,
Mm-hmm.
that when we're both like pretty, if in a street epistemology kind of context, we would be in the strongly disagree kind of thing, like that would be our but I have to consider, being an academic and being in an intellectual environment, that there might be some arguments that would make me move on this position, which is that pedophile, no, the viewing of photographs, viewing of pornographic photographs shouldn't be illegal, like that, and that's, I'm not saying that's what Tom Flanagan was arguing, because he claims his view was strictly the drawings. And that was an interesting point that you made, is it drawings that you are putting on the internet and you're encouraging people to view, or is it just drawings that you've done yourself as part of your own sexual gratification kind of thing? And you could make the argument that it's actually good for a pedophile to be doing drawings, and that's not what I believe, but I'm just saying it's a possible argument that that's actually a good thing, because that distracts their attention away from actually harming children to their own inner world of doing stuff. I don't know. I
People
don't know.
make that argument for there's like child-sized sex dolls, and people make that argument that those dolls should not be illegal.
See, this is the difficulty of the
People are gonna like clip our words here and then tell everyone that we're fucking pedophiles. Sorry, like
I know, but it's just a danger. It's a serious danger. But I can feel my uneasiness mounting as we,
yeah, that threshold of
because I know it's but I'm thinking, damn it, like, we're not doing anything wrong here. We're trying to get a sense of what we have, an intellectual space at the university. We don't know the limits, especially now, because everything is kind of off limits, and or it's a very, very narrow thing. Your shirt, for example, I'm surprised you haven't had repercussions yet. You might still, that you are making people feel unsafe, like the Trump hat. Did you hear about the Make America Great Again cap episode?
A student had it pulled off of his head on Mount Royal campus.
Yep.
And there was no repercussions for the student who pulled the hat off of his head, is what I heard, is that she got away with it completely, which is you can't
wasn't
just
her, like, it was a, so there was a student politician who was being very, the policer of all apparel, and was telling him to take it off. And then another guy came and I believe took his hat off, this other guy. But it got misrepresented I was involved in a conversation with the president of the time about this. And the president was pretending that it was a friend of this guy who was doing it. And it was just it wasn't what it was, which was someone deciding you're not wearing that hat and I'm taking it off you. But it wasn't the woman. And she got the serious brunt of it because all the Fox News got onto it, and then all these people heard about it. Then they were all calling, finding out what her number was, and really violently threatening her with violence of all kinds. It was very, very ugly. That it became
of the woman who took the hat off.
She didn't take the. She wasn't the one who took the hat off the guy. So the scenario, which is on, I did watch the video of it. This guy's walking around with the hat off. He gets approached by this student politician who's telling him, you got to take the hat off. And if you don't take it, I'm marching you upstairs to talk to the president who's going to tell you to take it off. So he's going, what are you talking about? And this other guy becomes involved and takes the hat off and says, leave or whatever. And that was the borderline assault. Like for me, that's, you are entering into someone's space and you are doing stuff to them.
Absolutely.
Anyway, when I was talking to the president at the time about this, who's no longer there, he was pretending that this guy was a friend of the other guy, and it wasn't what it seemed to be, which I think was a highly implausible scenario that was being talked about. So part of it was a kind of a distortion of history to avoid the implications of what actually had happened. But that seems to me to be an example of safety is what's called safetyism running amok within. Whereas, someone wearing a t-shirt saying sex with children is great or something like that, or like something like that, like whatever, I don't know. Like now we're getting into this isn't good to have that, like you're having people wearing things. But in your case, you have a whole bunch of people actively wearing these shirts, which themselves are a problem. So like, it's a double standard kind of issue that is arising here too, is that, you're reacting.
I have to pause for 1 second. Sorry, my dog is.
Anyway, we're going to move to the other side here quickly. And for people who are, and this is, for me, is a very uncomfortable conversation, because I do realize that there are horrible ideas, and it's possible that hearing these horrible ideas could have consequences that are really socially negative. However, it has to be recognized that, first of all, we want to err on the side of freedom of expression. We want to err on the side of freedom of expression because we don't want to. I believe the example in the literature is it's like the presumption of innocence. It's better to allow 100 guilty people to go free than to have one innocent person convicted. That's the justice system kind of position. For the freedom of expression side, and especially in intellectual environments and things like comedy, which is another area, is you don't want to be censoring comedians because it's kind of the space where you're allowed to do that, which is, it's better to have, 100 horrible ideas being thought about than to censor one very, very important, insightful idea, which is going to help society figure out all the terrible problems that we're having. Anyway, I was just filling the time there. So, Kathy, we are past an hour's time. We've been kind of getting into stuff here anyway. So I'm going to turn it over to you and see if you have some questions that you'd like to ask me.
Well, yesterday we attended a talk at the library at the university.
Yes. Yep.
What was that talk about, and what are some of your thoughts on it so far?
Yeah. So the talk was on residential school denialism and the architects of the residential school. So it had a kind of a two-part kind of thing. One was all the supposed people who had created this horrible system, so the architects, and then there was a discussion about various denialists, both within and outside of MRU. And I heard about this talk a while ago, and I was thinking, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be talked about here. But I was worried, very worried about coming, because many people have claimed that my presence, just my presence, makes them feel unsafe. And I didn't want to, kind of antagonize people. So I wanted to be as, non-confrontational and everything. So I decided before I went there that I wasn't going to ask any questions at this talk. And this is kind of my approach that I've been taking now, is that I realize I used to, when I was at Mount Royal, I thought the university was in a much more robust kind of character than it actually was. And I used to hear things that I thought, like the spider web thing, where this idea doesn't make a lot of sense. And I would go and I would ask questions of whoever was articulating these positions and try to get clarification about them. And that's why I was asking you the questions about, how do you get a sense of that this question is not welcome? Well, people start getting really, like, you can feel the discomfort, people shuffling, people like they don't like it. But I thought this is an academic institution, and it's my duty as a professor to try to articulate what I think this is, and whether this, first of all, to try to understand it, and then secondly, to criticize it. Anyway, so I showed up at this talk, and the professor, to his credit, was very cordial to me and shook my hand. And so I was quite surprised about that. And I really did think it's possible. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I didn't know. But I was going to I wasn't going to do anything myself. That's all I knew. I was going to control my own things that I did. And I was going to just turn away. Every time, anything that happened, I would turn away. But I wanted to get all the details about what was said. And then at a later date, put forward my arguments in rebuttal to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's kind of the important thing here, is that we had this event, it happened, and I want to find out what that is, summarize it as accurately as I possibly, steelman it as much as I can, and then provide the reaction. Anyway, I was, I think, maligned in this talk. It wasn't explained why I had done some things which I think were justifiable, and my ideas, I wasn't able to explain. There was a quote in particular. So there's a couple of things that and Tom Flanagan. So Tom Flanagan was also maligned for nothing to do with his views on the residential schools. It was about the pornography, the child pornography kind of side, and that was, in my view, irrelevant to the discussion. So if this person wanted to go after Tom Flanagan, which is fine, like, and it's fine to go after Tom Flanagan for the pornography thing too. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, yeah. Tom Flanagan should be held to account for what he did, and certainly I think even he would say, at the very, everyone agrees that he chose his words very carelessly to allow the impression that he might have been talking about photographs when he claims he was talking about drawings. So that's a misunderstanding that he created by not being more careful. But you often do say things like, I did this myself not long ago, where I was referring to trans activism, and I said trans as a thing is made up. It's a made up thing. And that was not a good choice of words, because I'm not denying that people think that, I'm not denying that people think they're trans. Like they believe they
Right.
are. I'm saying it's subjective. It's a completely subjective thing. There's no objective basis for this claim. So that created a lot of problems for me, which I needlessly did by being careless. Anyway, so I thought that was gratuitous and just a cheap shot, because Flanagan's ideas about the residential schools and denial, we're talking about denialism, not about pornography or anything like that. And just because Tom Flanagan's views on pornography are, let's say they are horrible, that says nothing about his views on the residential schools. He could have horrible views on child pornography, but very, very astute analysis of the residential schools. So that was, I thought that was not good. But I thought that the professor, I thought he was trying most of the time to have an intellectual argument about the matter. He really didn't insult people very much about this. And he did show a certain amount of charitability when he was talking about I think it's Don Smith, if I'm not mistaken. Smith is his last name. Anyway, he's a defender of, I believe it's Egerton Ryerson. And he was trying to distinguish between the differing degrees of, terrible denialism, with Flanagan probably being at the extreme end, and this other Smith being at the other. One interesting thing, which I thought was curious, there was two omissions, which I thought were odd. One was the unmarked graves. So there's no discussion of the unmarked graves. So Grave Error, the book, is totally about the issue of the unmarked graves, and that's the denialist book that's being, the quote unquote denialist book that's being talked about. And then the other one was J.R. Miller. So J.R. Miller is the most well-known scholar on the residential schools. And J.R. Miller has argued that the residential schools were not genocidal, along with Smith, I believe. I think it was Smith and Miller. But for him to leave that out, I thought was curious, because he was kind of going after me for the comment that Albert Howard and I made in Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry. And this was written in about 2005. So this was before, the word genocide was being taken seriously as a concept and application. Like, no one was talking about that at that time at all, except for these two authors, Chris, John, and Young, in a book called The Circle Game, which they did as a submission to the Royal Commission. And they brought up this genocide idea. And at the time it was like, whoa, like this is, and Albert and I made, and it might've been me, I think it was probably me, who said we thought that this was a bit hysterical. The kind of, like, it was very rhetoric, like the rhetoric was very, very intense from this piece. So I thought it was completely over the top, the discussion. So that's my general kind of sense about what went on. So I think there's some good things about it, but there are some things that, certainly need rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, what did you think about his comment comparing your point of view, your position, to 2 + 2 = 5, and therefore no one should even consider it? No one should even consider your position or hear your position, because it's just completely as absurd as 2 + 2 = 5. An analogy, a ridiculous analogy, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's, as I think you pointed out, I think history can't be seen as that kind of, that's not really very applicable. And it's like the John Stuart Mill kind of thing about, ideas, often if they're mostly wrong, sometimes have a few correct aspects to them. And this kind of censorship, that's the thing, is that, I totally understand that, as a professor, you don't have you don't have unlimited time to be examining things. And therefore if you think that an idea is completely off the charts, then you're not going to look at it. But I think with the residential schools and the genocide question, like genocide, the concept of genocide, if this is what we're talking, things got lumped in. A lot of things got lumped in there. That I was trying to figure out all the claims that were being quote unquote discredited, and one of them was genocide. Like the argument that the residential schools are genocidal, arguing against that. Was that being claimed that that's 2 + 2 = 5? Like, what was the 2 + 2 = 5? Like, what was the claim that he was taking issue with? I wasn't very clear. Like, and then the pornography thing, which is like he got on that. So is that what he's talking about? Is that he doesn't want to, entertain ideas in the classroom about whatever pornography, whatever that claim would have been, child pornography shouldn't be illegal, or everyone should watch child pornography because it makes us better able to know what it is. And like,
Yeah, it had nothing to do, it had nothing, but so I think what he was trying to say is that he had fulfilled all of the requirements of genocide by the what is it? I'm having a brain fart right now.
The Genocide Convention of the UN.
Right, UN, yeah. So
there's
by the UN,
there's five, Mark, there's 5 criteria that the UN has specified.
Right. And so he said that those have been substantially fulfilled, all of them. So anyone who says that they have not been fulfilled, it's the same as saying 2 + 2 = 5. And therefore that person should be completely dismissed. We shouldn't even hear them whatsoever. And to me, that seems really unintellectual. Like, it's like, if you make a claim, should you not welcome criticism?
I'm not sure, like, it wasn't clear to me that was what he was arguing. Like it might have been, it's possible, it's one interpretation of his, but he had so many. My own thing is that I'm going to have to go over this in detail to try to figure out exactly what the positions were. The other interesting thing was the historical documents, the question of historical documents. So there was a document that he was referring to, which is in dispute. And this is the Duncan Campbell Scott document, which Nina Green has done extensive research on, and I'm going to go revisit that. But the document, the original document, with Duncan Campbell Scott writing a letter to some authority saying that the final solution, he uses the words supposedly, allegedly, the final solution in reference to the indigenous, non-indigenous relations and assimilation of indigenous people. So I assume, and he wasn't very clear on that because he was asked a direct question on what was the final solution. And the final solution was assimilation for Scott. So he said not one, and that is a correct quote, which is, I will not stop until every indigenous person is absorbed into the body politic. That was his assimilationist view, which in my view is not genocidal. But in this Scott quote about the final solution, we despite months of searching, that document does not exist in the archives. So that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it means that we can't find any. So the question is, how did these researchers who are writing on this document, how did they get this? Like, where did they get this from, this document? Because it's not in the archives. They can't find it. Now, maybe it was in the archives at one point. Well, it has record number and everything. So that's the idea. But they can't. Now it's all the archivists after many, and they've gotten many inquiries about it. They can't find it. Now, it's possible it was destroyed by someone, stolen or something, but it's also possible that was invented. So we can't just proceed forward as if that exists anymore. because we haven't been able to get the actual verification of that. So that's another interesting thing that came up in that thing. But I'm going to have to go over this talk and see what is the 2 + 2 = 5. He did mention at one point, if you say that the residential schools provided educational benefits that would not otherwise be available, which that is mine. I said that publicly and I stand by it. I don't see anything wrong with that statement. It's a true, as far as I'm concerned, it's a true statement. And this is based upon the understanding, which I know is not a popular one, that pre-contact Indigenous people and people who are aligned with the pre-contact culture did not have educational system, did not have an educational system, because you need writing in order to have an educational system, and they had what J.R. Miller calls looking, listening, and learning. Now, J.R. Miller argues that that's an educational system, but I don't think looking, listening, and learning is an educational system. And an educational system is, reading, writing, arithmetic, these sorts of things. And you need discipline. You need certain disciplines. You need to have, a kind of structured environment to do that. And the Indigenous population were nomadic, semi-nomadic at much of this time, especially in the remote areas. And they found at the time, over 100 years ago, that if they didn't have Indigenous children separated from their parents and brought into this structured environment, they would spend, a number of months trying to teach the children things, and then the children would go off with the parents, and then they come back months later and it would just be all gone. So that's what they were talking about then. Now, maybe the separation was too much of a hardship and too much of a destructive thing, and that should have not have happened, but they had no knowledge of that at the time. So is that this kind of discussion that I'm saying here, which I think is quite reasonable, is that 2 + 2 = 5? I'm not entirely clear about that.
Apparently, yeah, he's saying that, even saying there was a silver lining to the residential schools whatsoever. And if you go on to the IRSRG website, Indian Residential School Research Group website, like there's pictures where they took kids on airplanes to go show their dances in Mexico and stuff like that. Like there was opportunities for travel for some students, so to say that there's zero silver linings, that it was just as horrible as a Nazi death camp to be in those schools.
I don't know, like if you say there was no abuse, like I think you'd have to be, that's a bit of a, in my view, a 2 + 2 = 5 kind of thing.
There's abuse in school now.
Because I think no one can deny the harm. Like, and this is what annoys me a bit, is that people are saying that I don't accept that there were harms in the residential school. I completely accept that there were harms. I completely accept that there were terrible problems. There was a lot of neglect and a lot of underfunding and all the tuberculosis stuff. That's, there was a lot of tuberculosis in Indigenous communities generally. So, and Indigenous people tended to have greater sensitivity to it as well, I think, is what's been argued. But certainly more should have been done, as Bryce did point out, that, the government should have done its due diligence in improving those circumstances more than it did. But they did, like, it's not true that they didn't do anything. Bryce submitted his report. The government responded and tried to do some things. Now, maybe it didn't do enough, and so on. And certainly Duncan Campbell Scott was not a very empathetic individual. Like he was a disciplinarian. He was like tough. Like, we got, either they're gonna do this, or he wasn't thinking of the terrible dislocation which people were experiencing, which I don't think at the time they were very cognizant of and didn't really, they wasn't even part of their way of thinking about things. They were not, you know, they were hurt, like, you know, that they were seeing all sorts of problems that they were dealing with all the time, with all sorts of people dying from all sorts of different things. And he was just, well, and plus Indigenous people, that's the other thing, which is kind of sad, is, you know, Indigenous people were not very powerful in comparison to non-Indigenous people. Not to say that all non-Indigenous people were powerful, because there's many, many non-Indigenous people who suffered terrible things during this era as well. But you didn't really have any Indigenous leaders who wielded power within the Canadian system. And so because of that, Indigenous people were taken advantage of much, much more than non-Indigenous. Like these kinds of considerations, which I'm totally like, hey, you know, I think there's a lot of blame to go around for many things. Like it's not, but that doesn't take away from my statement that the residential schools provided Indigenous children with an education that they would not otherwise have received. Many. And this is nothing about, again, and that's kind of another annoying thing I found about the talk, is that I'm dehumanizing Indigenous people with my comments. I'm not I'm saying humanity has had a long, long history, and all of us were at one time had similar characteristics of the Indigenous population that existed 500 years ago. But we can't deny the developmental difference between Indigenous hunting and gathering societies and modern nation states. That's not saying anything about current Indigenous people who are completely integrated, like many of the people there, right? They, you know, seeing that quote that I wrote, Albert and I wrote, you know, would have really steamed up a lot of the Indigenous observers, I'm sure, because they would have said that I'm saying this about them when I'm not. Like they're literate, they're participating in the educational system, they're going on to be astrophysicists or whatever they're going to be, but they're going to become astrophysicists not because of any Indigenous cultural characteristics. They're not going to become an astrophysicist by listening to Leroy Little Bear talk about the Blackfoot language, or Chief, you know, Bear Chief, Roy Bear Chief talk about the spider web. Like you're not going to draw a map with the longitude and the latitude by listening to the spider web discussions. And there's a bit of that kind of, that's what is being implied.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you feel being in that crowd? Did you feel like people were kind of like, there she is, she's the evil one that we need?
I thought it was fine. Like, I think I was frustrated myself because I muzzled myself. So I made up my mind before I went in there that under no matter how much people were appealing to me to speak, I was not going to speak, because I think that's where I've got to be at right now if I want to make any progress, because I'm so maligned that anything I say is going to be seen as a provocation. So that was the sort of the frustrating thing, not being able to defend yourself. I will defend myself, but I'm going to wait till I get all the slides, get everything that was said, and then, you know, figure out the relationship between the slides and what was said, and then, you know, draw a carefully intellectually sound position in response. So, you know, I think it was a great, you know, at the time I was quite rattled, I've got to admit, as you know. I was a bit, you know, I had a high level of high intensity whine that was going on in my head. But, you know, after I've gone away and, you know, absorbed things, I thought it was a great event. I thought it was, and I thought the questions you asked were were very, very insightful. And that was about the pot. Maybe you should just, so I don't miss, what was the question that you asked there?
I asked him if he decided that part of the genocide was outside of the residential schools, and he said that it was the banning of the potlatch and the Sundance. And I said, well, I've heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that potlatches could involve human sacrifice,
Yeah.
and that the Sundances can involve people hanging themselves from hooks.
Yeah.
And that, you know, the definition of insanity is being a danger to yourself or others, and that's self-harm. So do you not think that banning, you know, events or ceremonies that could involve harming others or harming yourself,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be considered reasonable, not genocidal?
Yeah.
He said that he said no, there was no human sacrifices, and even considering asking that question was racist. And he did this face like, racist, like don't do that. And I said, oh, racist, like
And
okay.
to be charitable, again, because we want to do that, I think he was saying that if you said that the fact that people said that human sacrifices occurred during the potlatches, that was due to racist views of people saying that that's what led them to believe that could have happened, perhaps. And
Perhaps.
it is now an interesting question for me because I have done a little bit of investigations of the potlatch now because of Israel Wood Powell, which is the controversy that's going on in Powell River now. Is that's one of so Powell, Israel Wood Powell was a superintendent of Indian Affairs in the late in 70, I think it's 72 to 88, something like that. Anyway, he was seen as being a horrible individual who should never have his name uttered because he was involved in outlawing the potlatch, which then led me to do some investigations of the potlatch. And there were some archival records. It was original documents, which are in this piece that I'm currently writing for on Powell River. And I never saw any reference to violent actions in the potlatch in these records. Now, maybe I didn't do an exhaustive search of these things. So I'm interested who has said that the potlatch involves human sacrifice? Do you have any sense of that as to where that's from?
I think I got it from Jim McMurtry
Okay.
on one of his posts.
Okay.
But
you don't need to look it up. I think this is now an error. See, in the academic setting, this is the appropriate way to go about this, to say, okay, we've got the potlatch and we've got the reasons. So the potlatch, people were opposed to it, all the European people. And I should mention, some indigenous leaders were opposed to the potlatch as well. Now, maybe they were manipulated by missionaries and so on, but many indigenous people converted to Christianity. So if you converted to Christianity and you thought that this was the true belief system now, you would not look very highly upon other indigenous people who were practicing what at that time was thought by Christians to be godless, animistic beliefs. So that was part of it. The other part of it was the disadvantage that the potlatch, and this is just the gift giving, which is my understanding of the potlatch, is that the potlatch was what's called a forced gift. It was either a redistribution system amongst the indigenous group itself, or it would have been what's considered to be a forced gift situation. So this is when you force through reciprocity, you give someone a gift and you expect the same in return, the same or greater in return, and maybe greater. So that's like a competition. And this was all fine and well before European contact because there weren't that many goods that existed. But when you had European contact, you had all sorts of surplus now, and you had all these, blank. Like there was one kind of, I remember reading one record where you had thousands of blankets which were being given away. So if you give one group thousands of blankets, that other group now has to give back the similar, and that's a lot of resources so the poorer, the more impoverished Indigenous groups had a very hard time with this, because they were having to impoverish themselves more to meet the wealthy, the standard of the wealthy groups. So 4 Indigenous leaders at the time in Powell's tenure had written this letter, or had been involved in sending this petition to Powell saying, please put down the potlatch, please stop the potlatch. So, and this is a bit uncertain as to what was going on in terms of dynamics, but still, if you're Powell and you see, if you were Powell and you saw this, you got this thing from Indigenous leaders, which were saying, hey, we should do something about this. This is not good for our group. You might be sympathetic, and why should you listen to the powerful Indigenous group and ignore the powerless? Like, shouldn't we be defending those that are marginalized? This kind of thing. But so that's the academic kind of process, and I'm not an expert in it, but I'm saying the way this is going here is it makes people fearful to raise the kind of questions you were asking, because you, at the very least, were kind of being painted as someone who is ignorant of whatever is going on. Like, you just don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're not a racist or whatever, which he said. He didn't say you're a racist, after you expressed surprise at that comment. He clarified and said, he wasn't saying you were a racist. He was saying whoever was making this claim, that was a racist, that racism led them to make that claim, but there was nothing to it. There's nothing to that. And I have no idea. I've never seen it myself, so I'm a bit skeptical of it, because human sacrifice is a real, that's something that is, I don't think I've seen any reference to that in any of the, but who knows? Like, I'm not an expert, so I'm willing to learn as to what went on, and what I would do if I wanted to find out more about this, is I'd start digging into the historical records and go to the original documents, which is what you got to do. You can't look at people talking about things. You look at, okay, was anything written at the time about human sacrifice? Like, what, and who wrote that? And was it, in terms of observers, did they have some axe to grind? Was it one Indigenous group belittling another as whatever? Like, what was going on? But that's kind of, but I think that the biggest danger with this residential school denialism sort of stuff is that those kinds of conversations are not going to happen at all, because everyone's going to be going, I don't want to tread on this subject, because it's not going to be good in terms of whatever, because it's like you're getting a signal as to what the right way to think about this is.
Right. Well, so in this current climate, like, it turns my stomach. I get anxiety about participating in this, about asking questions. It's obviously not conducive to learning if you have anxiety about asking questions or being contrarian or being a heretic. What do you think is there hope, or do we just give up? Like, I don't know.
Never give up. Yeah, it's my thing with the bird, where there's a great visual with the bird. It's called Never Give Up, and you've got this bird that's eating this frog, and the frog has its hands around the neck of the bird, so the bird can't eat the frog because the frog's closed off the. This is the kind of, you gotta get serious here in terms of your fight. Like, so never give up. Right? It's better to, die on your feet than, I can't remember it's Emil Zapata quote about on your knees versus on your, it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees. That's the quote. It's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. And that is like, yes, Yes, don't live on your knees. Get up. And if you can just convince enough people of that, then we can fight. We have a good chance of that. But trying to get the person to be the one to stand up and not to be on their knees is a big, huge thing. And you're standing up, but everyone's watching you, and how people are what's gonna happen to you is gonna be of huge significance, because they're thinking about this, like, what do we do about this? Like, it's always this kind of chess game that's going on, and we need to figure out how to create circumstances where more people can stand on their feet. But it's not very much. We don't have very much to work with anymore, because everything is being slowly taken apart, dismantled. The entire infrastructure that was built up that helped people to stand on their feet is being dismantled. So in the universities, it was the tenure system that enabled people to stand on their feet. And now that doesn't exist anymore. So it was bad enough historically. And I used to say this to people: you have tenure. What are you afraid of? Get out there, use it. That's why you have it. I can't say that anymore, because it's not gonna save you at all. And so that's a big problem. So yeah, so I think the one thing, I think there's a couple of areas of glimmers of hope. The first one is the local councils, local democracy. So we got 5 city councils now that are seriously corrupted in British Columbia. 3 that I have been involved with: Powell River, Quesnel, and Sechelt, and 2 others which haven't been in the spotlight as much: Kamloops and West Vancouver. They've all been under attack in various ways from the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs. Anyway, in Powell River, which is ground zero in this, you have seriously mobilized citizens, much more than anywhere else I've seen. Lots of skill and lots of fight, and so we are dug in Powell River. So that's the first thing. So I'm working on that, working with the city, the people of these, to kind of fight back against what's going on there. And then the other is the spectrum street epistemology. So this is another area that is, you can do it because you don't need any university resources to be able to do it. So, and that's happening at University of Regina next week. So for people who are not aware of the University of Regina situation, this is huge. And I don't know what, I'm still working on what's actually going to transpire there. So I was invited to give 2 talks at the University of Regina, one on indigenization and one on the unmarked graves at Kamloops, the Kamloops case. The university canceled both of these talks because of safety, for reasons of safety, which is absurd, because in both of the situations that happened at Lethbridge in Alberta, there was no question of safety problems. It was all of the theatrical kind of reaction. And because, if these people who are theatrical get what they're demanding, then they're going to become emboldened. But it can easily be acted against. But it's just that because you got to come up against these activists, it doesn't happen. Anyway, so I said to the president, I've told the University of Regina I'm coming in to do to do spectrum street epistemology, and I've got Lloyd Hawkeye Robertson, who's an Indigenous psychologist and adjunct professor at the University of Regina, to come in with me, and we're going to do spectrum street epistemology. Daniel Page, who's also was a professor at the University of Regina, had academic freedoms of his own. He's going to come and film it. So what spectrum street epistemology, for people who are not aware of what spectrum street epistemology is, you have a claim that you're going to examine, and it can be anything. But in my case, at Regina, it's going to be, and you should usually, it's best to have the claim as the opposite of what you believe. So in this case, it's going to be the University of Regina protects academic freedom. That's the claim. And you have 7 mats: strongly disagree, disagree, slightly disagree, neutral, slightly agree, agree, strongly agree. And you lay these out. And so you have this claim, and you get people who are coming by, just walking by, to occupy one of these mats. And then you ask them why they strongly agree or why they're neutral or whatever, and they explain. And then you try to ask a series of questions to try to figure out how they came to that belief and what evidence they would require for them to modify their position. And it's not a very deep way of looking at things, but it has the benefit that you get people to actually say what they think is true, which is not happening. So in the case of and you're, just so you know, you're muted.
So yeah, I was going to say, yeah, no, it's not happening. People are not saying what they think.
Yeah, so if you do so that's what I'm hoping to do over the next while is I got my sound system. And got these microphones. And so I'm going to just, set up these mats and then, go around. Anyway, in the case of what we were talking about yesterday, that would be really good. So, for example, the potlatch. The potlatch involves human sacrifice. Strongly. So where are you on that position? Where are you? What mat would you stand on?
I'd probably stand somewhere in the middle, and I'm trying to figure out the truth because I mean, a simple Google search shows that, like, I guess there was some Russian initiative to try and prevent human sacrifice potlatches. It pops up in a regular Google search.
Okay,
so I have to dig deeper. I have to see if,
but just that you won't be able to do that in this when we're doing the structure. But you would stand on neutral, or you would stand on slightly agree.
Probably slightly agree, because I think that human sacrifice happened in most of the world.
Yeah. So anyway, so you're on slightly agree. I'd probably be on neutral because I've never looked, or I might even be on slightly disagree because I find it a bit hard to believe just based upon sacrifice, the context of human sacrifice, which the one that I know the most is the case of the Maya and like the Central American indigenous groups and the Inca. I believe you were saying the Inca. I know mostly the Aztecs and the Maya, right? You have pictures of all sorts of horrible, bloodthirsty things going on there. And I'm relatively, I would agree in that case, but I just don't think it's the same kind of society. Hunting and gathering people, I'm not sure that sacrifice, you didn't have enough surplus to be, that's my thought process. So I'm slightly disagree. And then, so if I asked you what would make you move from the slightly agree to the neutral, like what would be, what kind of information would you require to move from one to the other?
I suppose historians saying that there's absolutely zero evidence, telling.
You're that you don't, this historian who was saying that you're all, you don't know what you're talking. He didn't say that. He was much kind. He was being a good professor a little bit. Like the racism thing was a bit like, as soon as you say the word racism, it's as you kind of reacted, like you thought initially he was accusing you of that was a racist thing. But he was saying that there's no evidence, according to him, there's no evidence of this.
Right. So it's like, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what would make me move over, but I know that like the Irish, they would take their firstborn sons
Mm,
and they would slit their throats and throw them into bogs as virgins.
mm.
Um, allegedly, I mean, this is from the book How the Irish Saved Civilization, and how the evangelization stopped human sacrifice because Christianity is a human sacrifice religion. They sacrificed Jesus
Yeah.
on the cross. So then there's only one sacrifice that has to take place. Um, and the Mayans, they were, I'm not sure how much, if there was any sort of cultural exchange. I know they didn't have horses, so if there was walking or anything like that, if there would have been any sort of connection there. But I've been in caves in Guatemala, the Actunachilmacnal caves, where I walked among human skeletons who were sacrificed.
Mm.
So for me, human sacrifice, like I've seen bog people from Ireland in the Glenbow Museum. It existed and it was real. And so for me, it seems as though many cultures saw human sacrifice as a way to, even if they didn't have enough surplus, they would do it as a means to try and appease the gods to get more surplus,
Yeah.
right? So
Um, and so this kind of thing we're just doing there, and then that would bring up, because you said, I believe, crucifixion was kind of sacrifice, or at least in the case of Jesus, the the kind of the figure of Jesus, that was sacrifice, and then that would then raise, is, people are crucifying people is constitutes sacrifice, because like we're going to be now going to get into a bit of a problem with the terminology as to what, like, if you just kill a bunch of people, that's not necessarily sacrifice. It has to be
no,
a
it's a religious aspect to it. It's
yeah, and it's like we're going to give the gods this, and they're going to look kindly on us in some other way, like it's a
yeah,
way of kind of feeding the gods a bit.
yeah, we sacrifice Jesus and therefore we're absolved of our sins.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting, so that would be another thing. You can ask another claim to kind of get clarification, or you can ask additional questions. But so that's and I did this in Powell River. Powell River should change its name, and we did great a great event there, which I think has great possibilities for all of these things where people are fearful and frustrated because they're getting clamped down on and told that they can't say something because it's racist or whatever. It allows the ideas to be expressed, but it's not just like, I'm going to tell you this. Like, this is often what you get. Right? It's like, you're going to have someone berating you about your whatever. That's not, like, if in a good functioning street epistemology session, you don't have the people even talking to one another in terms of trying to convince one another of things. What you have is an exploration of why people believe the things that they do, so other people can watch and try and sort of see why it is that they think these things. But of course the woke don't want this at all, because they do not want a changing of minds according to evidence. That's not what they want. They want to intimidate people by using compassion, by weaponizing compassion. So they tell you that if you even think this, you obviously are a morally deficient person or an ignoramus. You think 2 + 2 = 5, or you think that people should, we should all be practicing sex with children because that would be good, or like whatever. The residential schools were all good and there's no problems. Like you thought the residential schools were a good idea. Like this kind of like really unfair accusations that everyone goes, oh, I know this is a toxic subject that we shouldn't be talking about because it's going to get me in hot water for doing this. So I think this, I think this is the answer a little bit to the university problems. And they can't stop you from doing it under this current, they can't stop you from doing it under the current climate, because you're not issuing threats. You're not causing a riot. You're just there talking to people. People are going to watch it and go, whoa. Anyway, Peter Boghossian, who's the initiator of this, he's going all over the place doing all this. And so it's just like, oh, this is fantastic. And it's not like we're going to get really deep into anything, but we at least have a much better kind of conversation. It's much better conversations that are going on in the Powell River. That's the one time I've done it. We had an incredible, like, people understood more at the end of it than they did before, because they were able to hear people, and we didn't have a wide range of opinions, but we had enough of a range. And if you don't have a wide range of opinions, you can get people to guess or to steal what's called, you're now going to go over and try to steel man that argument. So to put forward the best argument that you think can be made in support of this position. That's not ideal, because the only way you're going to get the best argument is to get someone who truly believes what it is. And that's a challenge, because the true believers, for the woke, they don't want to participate in this kind of thing, because they think 2 + 2 = 5, or you're a morally deficient person who you should be put in jail because you're so, you're causing so much pain and suffering and whatever else is going to be argued.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre that it's a situation where you're trying to promote thinking, and now you have to promote thinking from a position of being fired. What is that like for you to?
Yeah, well, it's not been easy, but it's to some extent a bit like, the main thing I've got to do is just say, I'm pursuing truth and justice. That's all I care about now. I don't care about anything else. Because if I care about the possible consequences, I have to try as hard as I can to move things in the direction of progress, which is greater cooperation amongst people, greater understanding, greater equality, I guess, in some sense, although that's a very contentious area. And once I just focus on that, it makes things quite a bit easier than before, because it's been very, very difficult to operate within the narrowly defined confines of the legal processes, which have just been, I cannot say this enough, absolutely horrible. Like being trapped in these legal processes that are stacked against you. And every time you try to fight them, more of it's used against you, because you're portrayed as a person who can't get along with people. So here you're saying is that the structure that we're operating within is completely corroded, and we don't really have an academic institution anymore. And we've got this whole corporate structure of the unions who are colluding with the employers and trying to, basically clamp down on people who are trying to speak the truth for reasons of safety. And you try to expose that, and you're hit again with like, oh, you're a provocateur, you're a troublemaker, you don't get along with people, all these sorts of things. So that caused huge amounts of stress having to deal within the system. But as I'm now starting to realize, I'm not gonna be able to pursue truth and justice through the existing legal channels. All I can do is release whatever documents I have that are not under an arbitration order. So there are some documents I cannot release, but everything else I can, and release them in a way that helps people to understand what's happening, because it's a lot. Like, I have tons and tons of documents. So trying to, kind of say to people, and I'm not trying to hide anything from it. I want everything to be available. That's the thing, is that I'm not I'm not saying, oh, I just want to shape things according to my own position. It's like, hey, I'm sure there's things that I've done and, will continue to do that I've made mistakes, and hey, I'm, what can I do? I'm operating in an incredibly hostile environment. People don't even know the half of it, the hostility. And I'm trying to pursue the truth as best as I can out of the existing situation. Anyway, Kathy, we're coming up toward the 2 hour mark, but I wanted to let you, for the last part of the program, say things that you think should be said that haven't been said, or any thoughts that you have that do you have a sense, maybe that'd be a good thing to end on, of how we can fight back and turn this juggernaut around in some way?
Well, part of me thinks that I'm just banging my head up against a brick wall and causing injury to myself, and that there's no point, and that I should just live my peaceful, luxurious life, with my children and go on vacations and not worry about any of this.
Yep.
But I sometimes I wonder why. Why am I know that a professor who just said, I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to participate,
Yeah.
When he got fired or whatever. And, I know I'm probably going to get put through the ringer for this. It causes anxiety. Like, I could be just enjoying my life, and people saying, oh, you're a provocateur, this or that. But I don't want to live in an Orwellian society.
Mm.
And I feel as though universities are pillars of our society. They're the location where freedom of speech happens. In
Yep.
fact, where it should be promoted. And it's not, oh, you're a provocateur. It's great. You're providing a different point of view.
Mm.
Like, let's encourage that. It's the place where the heretic doesn't get burnt at the stake.
Mm.
That's what it should be.
Yep.
And so for me to see this tradition, this is part of, this is long tradition. The academic institution, the spirit of academia is dying. It's being strangled. And so for me, it's very sad, because I want my children to be able to participate in this tradition when they're older. I don't want to say, don't bother going to university, because it's just an indoctrination center where they're going to spoon feed you your opinions like pablum. And where no one's allowed to ask any questions. And if someone has a talk where they show one point of view, they don't invite the speaker to present the other points of view and then talk together at the end and go back and forth a little bit more. They just say that other person is completely dismissed. We just dismiss them. This seems very sad, very sick. And so I want to encourage others to have courage. And courage isn't not being afraid, right? It's doing what you know is right, even if you are afraid. And I'm terrified. Like, I'm not having fun. I try and lean into it. I try and have fun with it. But a part of it is just very, very, very depressing. And so, yeah, things that haven't been said. I think we've already said, the courage aspect. And I just hope that more students feel like they can put their neck out there. And I know that's like, you want your degree, you feel like you're going to fail at life if you don't have a degree, that they could kick you out of school, this or that or whatever. But some things are more important, perhaps, than a
Yeah.
piece of paper, which is like the actual spirit of academia, so that people can have free thought.
Mm.
Because if they control what you can say and they control what you can hear, then they're controlling what you can think, essentially.
On that note, I think that's a great ending for this Rational Space Disputation. I just wanted to thank you so much, Kathy, for all that you do. You're an inspiration. That's all I can say.
Thanks,
Anyway,
Francis.
thank you
Back
very
at
much
you.
for appearing. Okay, thank you.
Bye.